Well, that's going to be hard to follow, that. Well, man. The word that Jenny had this morning, I thought, really just hit home, I think, I don't know if it hit me, but just that, that he is a lion, eh? He does have power, that he's conquered death, and that we're on the winning side, and sometimes we can't work it out and we don't know what's going on, and, we hit storms. And this bit of Jonah's story, really, and Murray, could you show that first slide? Thanks, bro. I wanted to, the takeaway that I want you to, from this morning is actually that God can work with honesty. That you're allowed to get real with him. You're allowed to be honest. And there was no deception in Jonah. He ran not because of cowardice, but he ran because, man, he didn't understand. And actually, he was passionate. And he was honest with God. And God can work with honesty. He can work with the real. And he's not afraid to get into that, to wrestle with you. There's a long history in the Bible of people wrestling with God. And for me, I guess so I feel like the Lord's just saying there's an invitation for you to invite him into the storms, to invite him into the hurts and the pains and the questions over life, and the frustrations. And more often than not, it's our limited understanding, our perception of reality. We just don't get it. And that was Jonah. And I was talking to, we've just started heading through Jonah, and we've done a few weeks, and it was Rachel, I think 3 weeks ago, introduced the story, and we sat down, we sort of had a bit of a chat, and at the end of it, she sort of quipped, it's like actually Jonah, when you really dig into Jonah, it sort of leaves you with more questions than answers, and man, that is true, and isn't that true of life often? Sometimes life's not just black and white, it's actually difficult. It's sometimes we really struggle to see where God is in it, in situations. And when I read through the first few verses of Jonah, it really gripped me, and so I wanted to jump into just those first couple and just share what I feel the Lord is is wanting to pull through. And we often, Jonah and the whale, right? It's one of the classic stories in the Bible, and almost all people know it. They've heard that story. It's in every children's book. And on the face of it, there's, and including myself, we've got a real sort of, have a number of sort of typical views, the way that we look at it. And one is that sort of the theme is like the sovereignty of God, that you can't run from God, cannot escape him, and that sort of theme. And certainly that is in Jonah. But the story's far more rich than that. There's the theme of the rebellious prophet, and that, it's like, yeah, he got there in the end, but hey, don't be like Jonah. He's sort of, there's that sort of theme of, it's a story of what not to do. In the last sort of 50, 100 years, it's the question of, the science question, of, well, can someone be swallowed by a whale? Or a fish? Can that be possible? And the whole story of Jonah gets narrowed down to 2 verses, right? And not looking at the whole thing and all the themes. There's so much more to this story and this book than simply a whale. And when I started to look into it, and I know Rachel mentioned this, but Jonah's a really unique guy. He's a really unique prophet. We don't know much about what he prophesied at all. Most of you think of Isaiah and Ezekiel and that, the books, 99%, all the oracles and the teachings, what they spoke out. Jonah is like a couple of verses on what he said, and the rest of it's his story. And a lot of the fruits in actually his dialogue with God, and his struggle with how God deals with the most wicked and violent people who are ignorant of him. And this is Jonah's story. Martin Luther, as in not Martin Luther King, but Martin Luther from who kicked off the Renaissance and the Reformation in the church, one of the great heroes of the church. He wrote this back in around 1480. In view of the repentance of Nineveh, I am tempted to say that no apostle or prophet, not even Jesus himself, performed and accomplished with a single sermon the great things that Jonah did. His conversion of the city of Nineveh with one sermon is surely as great a miracle as the rescue from the belly of a whale, if not even a greater one. So this guy, God used him so in terms of all the stories in the book, in a unique way that has not really been repeated. And yet we often think of Jonah sort of in a real sort of cliche sort of thought. And he's a way more complicated person than kind of we get it credit for. And I want to sort of give a bit of context about that this morning. And sort of just to help us get a feel for what he was like and what he was faced with, I guess. He was a prophet who ran away from his call. But yet in the Bible, he is actually quoted as a true prophet. That Jonah was a faithful prophet because God was in his story and deeply involved in his life at every stage. All right, the youth just heading out to do the cooking. So I want to show you just a little line, actually, of what, just to get a bit of perspective on what was happening for Jonah. And so old Jonah, he lived in, I reckon about somewhere around 785 BC before Christ. And so the Assyrian Empire started and ebbed and flowed from 1400 BC. So this is an empire that's lasted 700 years. Like, these guys were around a long, long time. And they ebbed and flowed and shrunk and expanded. But in 853 BC, Ahab, right? He was defeated in battle by Shalmaneser II from Assyria. So that was the time of Elisha and Elijah. So it was only 50 to 80 years before Jonah. So Jehu wipes out the house of Ahab in 842, and Jeroboam was born in 793 BC. And it says that, summarized in 2 Kings, that he did evil in the eyes of the Lord. That he continued to worship idols, and yet in it all, Jonah prophesied that actually, because of the suffering of the Israelites, because of Nineveh and Assyria, he is going to strengthen the borders of Israel for the sake of the people, for the suffering. Nahum, a contemporary of Jonah, declares that Nineveh is going to get destroyed and wiped out. The whole empire is going to be decimated. And so Jonah, who was a contemporary of Jeroboam II, lived within his lifetime. He gets this call. Like, I was trying to think of, so the Assyrian Empire, it's really hard to imagine what they were like, but they were an empire that glorified in death. And they loved, they publicized their torture and the conquering of nations. They had frescoes on their temples and walls showing the things that they did to the people that they conquered. And they were horrendous things. And this is an empire that at its peak from around 900 BC through to 600 BC reached its zenith. Just let you 300 years. Like, there's no real comparison in that. Like, ISIS would be kind of similar in its glorification of death, right? But But these guys were around for 800 years. And at its peak, at its maximum of empire, was when Jonah was alive. And you see in 722 BC, so only 50 odd years after Jonah, Nineveh, Assyria, comes in and decimates Israel completely. To the point, and they deport all the people from Israel. They are taken into captivity to the point that they call it the 10 lost tribes. No one knows where they went. They were just assimilated into Assyria and into the regions about. And so the people that the Assyrians then they just took smatterings of people and planted them back in Israel and said, hey, you look after the land, you deal with it. And then it's after 612 Nineveh fell, some of the Jews came back and returned to the land. But of course there was already a whole lot of mixed races in there, and they were basically the originators of the Samaritans. And that's why in Judah, they used to, in Jesus' time, they would walk around the land. They saw them as contaminated. They didn't see them as real people of the promise, because they were mixed in with the people who were planted there from Nineveh. So for Jonah, for a guy who's passionate of God, he hears God's voice. And Jonah 1:2, you can flick to the next slide. Thanks, Murray. It says, now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry out against it, for their wickedness has come up before me. And when I read that, I thought, man, oh God, it's been 300 years. I mean, did you not notice beforehand? Why has it taken so long? Why has it taken multiple generations? Were you making pikelets in heaven? Were you distracted by something going on? How come he notices now? And he sends Jonah, and the word comes to Jonah, and Jonah being, a prophet who's a mouthpiece for God, he knows it's God, right? And so what's he going to do? And with that context of what's happening, he's like, I am gone. I am out of here. There's no way I'm gonna give warning to this city, to this empire. Because the implication is that, well, if there's a warning, then there's a chance that they may listen. And so Jonah, of course, he runs. But what is this about? How do we grapple with that? How do we grapple with wickedness and evil in our world? And how does God see it? Does he not see it? And actually, we know it from the Bible. It's like, man, he says he knows the number of the hairs on your head. He is intimately involved in humanity. That he loves us with a passion. So how do we reconcile this? And sometimes we have to go back and we have to study Scripture to interpret Scripture. And there's a little passage here that I wanted to show that I believe it sort of may shed a bit of light on it. And this is actually right back in Genesis when Abraham is called to be a promise, to be a light for the world, that the promise would come through, salvation would come through for Abraham's seed. And so when he gives him this promise, he gives him and reminds him 4 times, because Abram at the time and Sarah, both of them, they didn't really believe it. They sort of, it's cool, but they're like, I'm 90, I'm not going to have a kid, it's going to be impossible. And there's this whole journey with these guys where they doubt the promise. And so, in Genesis 15, I think this is the 3rd promise he receives. God says to Abraham this. He said, then the Lord said to him, Know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterwards they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age. In the 4th generation, your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. Did you get that? Like, wow. So just to deconstruct that, he's saying to Abraham, your little tribe of a few hundred people that you've got, I'm going to take them into Egypt, right? And they're going to become slaves there for 400 years, not because of anything that they've done, but because I want to show grace and mercy to the people who live in the land that I've promised you. I want to give them multiple generations to find me, to actually discover who I am, to not just one generation, but 400 years. Like that's a really sobering thing. Imagine if you're the first generation going, well, that's kind of okay, you know. But if you're the last generation going out of slavery, woohoo, you know. What if you're the second and third, you know, and you're born into slavery? Oh, I've got a promise. Awesome, I'm staying in slavery. I'm going to die in slavery. Because it's like the bigger picture, the bigger perspective is way bigger than us. It's the story of God, this story of Him revealing who He is across generations. And it's interesting, the other side to it is that Abraham's crew, you know, could have so easily been wiped out in Canaan as they are. They were a small people in the big scheme of things. And so it's like God's going, you know what, I'm going to take you and I'm going to place you under the protection of the strongest nation in that time. And you're going to grow in there, you're going to thrive in there, you are going to multiply. It says that His favor will be on you. And it's out of jealousy, of course, what's what actually happened. It was out of jealousy that the Egyptians and fear that they said, actually, these guys could take us out. They're growing and they're thriving, so we will enslave them as a means to control them. And so God's perspective is so different. And sometimes we don't see it. We can't see it. Jonah couldn't see it. And yet, what's incredible is that Jonah is never judged for running. Do you know he's mentioned, Jesus references Jonah. And and even in the dialogue as we unpack the book of Jonah, there's nowhere that God says, Jonah, you screwed up. It's more like, Jonah, I understand how you see it. You're a prophet. You see the injustice, and you're you know, and you see what's going on, and actually, I'm still with you, and I'm going to pursue you, and I'm going to help you to get my perspective on things, on life. And Jonah is an honest guy. And that's, I think, why he ran. And we're going to unpack precisely why he, you know, or what the Bible sort of shows as why he ran, his motivations for it. But to know that this guy had a real heart for God, and he was passionate. He wasn't indifferent. Like, he didn't just ignore. He just went, whatever. You know, God can't. Hard to work with indifference. Hard to work with people who just don't care. But actually, He would rather you have an opinion, and He would rather you be honest with Him, because He can work with honesty. And I guess that is, I just want to remind you with that. I believe that's what He is, a lion, and He does roar, and He has power and authority, and He wants to invite you to invite Him into the struggles, into the storms of your life. because he's got something to say in those places. He can bring revelation. And so Jonah's frailty and his running from God is not hidden from him or us. And Jonah's reputation as a true prophet was never tarnished because he ran. God didn't give up on him. He pursued him. And so it says that he sent the storm. And we know that the boat now starts to sink, and the crew on the boat are freaking out. They're experienced sailors, and they cast lots, right? So they're like, well, who's responsible? This is not a normal storm. Something's going on here. And what happens? The lot falls to Jonah. So what's Jonah going to say? Well, he's honest. He's honest. And so this is what happens in Jonah 1, 8 and 9. Thanks, Murray. It says this. So they asked him, this is the crew, they're asking Jonah, tell us, who's responsible for making all this trouble for us? This is after the lot's fallen onto Jonah. Like, what kind of work do you do? Where do you come from? What's your country? And from what people are you from? What people are you? And he answers this. He says, I'm a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. Like, wow, what a statement. Like, if you're a sailor right now, you're thinking, he doesn't worship the God of harvest, or the God of the mountains. It's like, oh, no, I'm a Hebrew. I worship the God of heaven, the God of the heavens, who made the land and the sea. And you're thinking, oh boy, this is not good. Like, he's in control of the land and the sea. There's not too many places I can run from. And there's a lot of irony in Jonah, right? It's hilarious. He's like, he gets the word, oh, I'm running. Where are you going to go? I'm going to go to the sea. And who do you serve, Jonah? Oh, I serve the God of the sea. It's like, it's all these ironies in it, and it's like, you find yourself cracking up. And so he says this to the sailors. And the response, it says that the sailors are terrified because they get it. They're like, you've screwed us. Like, where are we going to run now? Like, they are in a storm. They can see God's power and might over the storm. Like, this is not lip surface. And so Jonah is like prophesying over these guys of who the God of the universe is. And they're terrified. And so here's this irony. Again, Jonah refuses to speak, right? But when he speaks, man, is he powerful. Man, is he fruitful. What happens? The sailors, they try to row for land, as Greg was sharing last week. They try to not throw him overboard. They don't want to sacrifice him. And Jonah, even though he does not want to obey God, right? He's like, guys, you know what? It is my fault. I am the responsible for what's happening to you. So sacrifice me. Throw me overboard. And it will save your life. Like, this guy he's honest. He's honest. He's not scared of death. So which sort of raises the question now. It's like, well, why did he run from the word from Nineveh? He wasn't, that could be certain death speaking to Nineveh, speaking to a whole city of people who glorify death. He doesn't seem to be too worried. He's not afraid. And so so in the end, they throw him overboard. And it says that in that the sailors, that they pray to Jonah's God. They offer sacrifices. They offer commitments to God. So it's like they become believers in that moment. They see God's power and His authority. They don't know anything about Jonah's God, but they're like, mate, we're going to make some commitments, some promises to him in that moment. So Jonah is enormously fruitful when he finally speaks. That the sailors themselves become believers. They acknowledge the Hebrew God and greatly fear him. So how does God deal with wicked people who are ignorant of him? How does he balance justice and mercy? How does he work through people? Jonah shows us that actually life is not that simple. That actually we need his perspective on things. That God will work with honesty. That he is passionately interested in you. That he works over nations. He maneuvers and deals and brings justice. But he also is such a merciful God also. And he's not just interested in nations, he's interested in you and I. He continued to pursue Jonah. He didn't just leave him be. There's Jacob wrestled with God. He was called a swindler, and he knew how to work the system. And if you look at the way he starts, and he does these deals with God prior to, when he gets these promises, he's like, well, if you look after me and you give me your wife when I head over and head over to farm in Haram. If you look after me, then, you'll be my God and not just the God of my fathers. And so there's this journey with Jacob. He wrestles with God. He's not convinced. He has favorites in his family. He's really dysfunctional in the way he treats his kids, to the point that his brothers are willing to kill another brother, Joseph. And then he loses Joseph, where he thinks he's lost Joseph, for 20 years. His other brothers throw him in the story. They throw him in the well, and he gets sent into slavery. No one tells Jacob. For 20 years, Jacob thinks his favorite son, from his favorite wife, his firstborn was lost. And Joseph does this, whole story and whole when it unfolds that he becomes the number 2 in Egypt. He asked Jacob to send his other son Benjamin if they were starving with a famine and needed food, and so he sends his sons. Benjamin gets left behind, and Jacob comes back, and the sons come back, and they're like, "Man, we've lost Benjamin," and he's like, "God, where are you? I've got nothing left," and he thinks everything has been, is ash in his life. He wants to die, only to find out that the very thing that he thought was dead was actually ending up to rescue him and to save him. And Jacob thought he was abandoned by God for 20 years. Like, God's a dramatic God. But I think it's actually the real true story was God looked around for someone who could walk that journey, who had the tenacity and the strength to hold on when any other person would have given up. And Jacob's, when he finally sees God's perspective on things, when he finally sees what's happened, he is blown away. And his story is written in the Bible. And billions of people throughout history, take courage and strength from Jacob's journey. And so maybe what you're going through right now has got nothing to do with you. We think, God, what's going on? Like, do you hate me? Do you, like, my life sucks. Why is this all happening to me? And it's like, just hold on a little bit longer. It's got nothing to do with you. I love you, but actually, your family needs to see your story. Your neighbors need to see your story. They're going to look back. You're going to look back and go, oh my goodness. Like, God, you were there the whole time. But the invitation is, like Jonah, will you invite him into the storm? Will you get honest with yourself and get honest with God? And he wants that honesty. He wants to wrestle with you. There is a rich history in the Bible where God, he will speak to honesty He doesn't speak to indifference. He doesn't speak to just, I don't care anymore. But he speaks to passion. And I believe, someone needs to know that this morning. And as the team, have come up, we'll finish on a song, hey, and but with Jonah, when he invited God into the storm stopped. The raging stopped. The raging in his heart subsided. He started to get onto a journey of where he began to understand God's perspective. And that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. That doesn't mean that it's going to be simple. Jonah's a complex guy. But you know what? It does mean that your life will be fruitful. And it does mean your life will be significant, that it will impact others. And so I encourage you this morning to invite him into the storm. And so if you'd like prayer this morning, if you'd like to just kind of acknowledge God and just say, hey, God, I'm a bit cooked right now. I don't know why or what's happening. Maybe it's family, maybe it's relationships, maybe it's careers, maybe it's health, maybe it's things that are way bigger than you. He invites you to be honest with him, and he wants to encourage and lift you up. He is the Lion of Judah, and he is powerful, and he can silence the storms. Bless you.